his case a, quote, show trial. The blurring you see of the judge's image is CNN's own blurring. Stone deleted the picture soon after and reposted, this time without the crosshairs. He later took down that post as well. Minutes ago on the stand, Stone told Judge Jackson he was kicking himself for the post, saying he was heartfully sorry, but Stone could not explain who sent him that particular photo, and he claimed he did not recognize the crosshairs at first. Stone was arrested and charged last month with lying to congressional investigators about his efforts to communicate with WikiLeaks to try to damage Hillary Clinton during the 2016 presidential election. CNN's Sarah Murray's been in the courtroom today. And Sarah, I understand there's a ruling just in?
Yes, that's right. The judge has decided to gag Roger Stone completely. We have our folks inside the courtroom. We have folks outside the courtroom. This is just now coming from the judge. Remember, Roger Stone had a fairly tailored gag order before. He just couldn't speak about the case around this courthouse. Now the judge has said, no, Mr. Stone, I'm not giving you another chance. This is after Roger Stone decided to take the stand in his own defense. But the judge said that his apology rung hollow. She didn't feel like his testimony was credible. And now she's saying he cannot make any statements about the investigation or any participants in the investigation, not on the radio, no press releases, no media interviews, nothing on social media. And Jake, you could tell the judge was very aggravated when she was in court today. She felt that Roger Stone was shifting in his stories of how this post came to be. There were a lot of questions from her as well as from prosecutors about why he posted that image twice, his role in it, and he wasn't able to answer their question about where the image came from in the first place, which seemed to be a point of frustration for the judge in particular, Jake. And Sarah, Stone took the stand. He did apologize for the post. He claimed he didn't know what that symbol meant that looked very much like a crosshairs, but it's also just not the photo and the crosshairs image. It's also the content of the caption. Well, that's right, Jake. And the judge did say, look, there's nothing ambiguous about crosshairs. So she wasn't buying into this belief that Stone didn't know what that symbol meant or that maybe it stood for something else. She pointed that out. But she and the prosecutor also pointed out that he then, had this caption that he wrote on the Instagram post, which took aim at the judge. It took aim at special counsel Robert Mueller. And then he continued to do interviews. He went on InfoWars and said that this was all something the media was ginning up to make him look bad. And so she really felt that his statements around this Instagram post in interviews didn't reflect what he was showing up in court and trying to deliver as this heartfelt apology. And that's why the judge, I think, Jake, said that this rang hollow. All right. David Urban is going to join us and talk about this. Sarah Murray, thank you so much. David Urban, I want to go right to you. Stone trying to play dumb on the stand here. Crosshairs, Instagram post. The judge was just not buying it.
Yeah, it's hard to understand how when you're looking down the barrel of a bunch of years in prison, that you don't understand when the judge says, don't say things about, don't go outside these two lines, and you go far afield of that. You don't understand there's going to be repercussions. It's pretty hard it's pretty incredulous. The judge was clearly concerned that Stone was trying to incite something. Yeah. And she said she was not convinced that he was just all talk, no action, that she thought he was trying to get somebody to do something potentially to her. Do you think there's that much strategy going on in Roger Stone's head? I don't know if he specifically thought that posting this would then lead directly to someone doing something. But the insinuation is absolutely there. I mean, Roger Stone, this is a pattern for him. This is something this behavior is not out of the ordinary. And it's so interesting that he would not be sitting in that courtroom today. He wouldn't have this spotlight on him had he not tied himself with Donald Trump. All of this that Roger Stone is quote unquote going through, because Roger Stone thinks he's the victim here, but whatever, is because he tied himself to Donald Trump. So look, these antics, because he lied. And because he lied, but again, I wouldn't put it past him, Jake, that Roger Stone had lied previously. But because previously in various other instances, but specifically because Roger Stone has tied himself to Donald Trump, he's gotten mixed up into the mess of his candidacy and now the presidency. He is sitting in this courtroom for antics that he regularly engages in. It is odd, Paul, that a president of the United States would be associated with somebody like this. I mean, there are sleazy people in all walks of life, but normally there's at least one person who's a buffer between the politician and the sleaze. Well, and Mr. Stone has been close to this president for 40 years. Mm-hmm. He's probably got the longest political relationship with Donald Trump of anybody. Was key to his activities in Atlantic City, pushed him in previous times to run, maybe for governor of New York, maybe for president.
They're terribly close. They're very, very close. And I know Mr. Stone likes to sort of hold himself out in public as a merry prankster. And this is not a prank. This is not a joke. Well, there was a federal judge murdered when Gabby Giffords was shot in 2011 in Tucson, Judge John Roll. We don't even have to go back except to 2017 when Steve Scalise, a Republican congressman, was murdered by a political terrorist who wanted to kill Republicans.
He survived.
He survived. He was shot. He was not. Thank God he's still with us.
Very
but
serious.
There are really evil people out there, and those of us in the public eye had to be really careful not to incite violence. So you post a picture of a judge with crosshairs, that's just not a mistake. That could be incitement.
And Tony?
Totally agree. I think we've seen far too much incendiary rhetoric going on for far too long. I think we've seen anti-Semitism on the rise in New York, all over the world. I think we need to just settle down and stop with this kind of chicanery and all of that.
I want to bring in the former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, Ellie Honig. Ellie, what did you make of Roger Stone's explanation this afternoon in court for the Instagram post, his claim that it was not intended to be threatening?
It was extremely Roger Stone-ish. And by that, I mean, he was trying to have it both ways, and it was highly non-credible. This idea that he didn't know how the image got on his phone, he didn't know how the image got posted, he didn't know which of his volunteers, I don't know who's volunteering for Roger Stone, but he didn't know which of his volunteers did this. And three bad things came out of this hearing for Roger Stone. One, he's got a complete gag order on him now. Two, the prosecutor and the judge both said on the record that they found Stone's testimony not credible. That's going to have a major hit if and when he gets sentenced down the line. There are sentencing enhancements for giving false testimony. And three, Stone still could be looking at a new federal charge. And at the end of the hearing, when the judge says on the record in front of the prosecutor, I found that post to be threatening, if I'm back in the prosecutor's chair, I'm going back to my office and I'm going to my chief and I'm saying, we need to think hard about whether we're charging him for the federal crime of threatening a federal judge.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, was it not wise for the defense to put him on the stand, to put Roger Stone on the stand?
It was incredibly risky. I was shocked when we found out that this was happening. I think their thought was this is the only way we can avoid having a more restrictive gag order put on. So they rolled the dice a little bit, but boy, did it backfire on him terribly.
Are you surprised at the way the judge spoke with him? I mean, I know obviously nobody likes to be threatened or feel like they're being threatened, and there are greater punishments in this country for threats and crimes against people who are symbols of law enforcement, whether police officers or judges. But her tone was really very, very sharp.
Yeah, I give her a lot of credit, Judge Jackson. She's shown before she had a piece of the Manafort case. She is a no-nonsense judge. Her ruling was not at all mealy-mouthed. She came right out and said what needed to be said. She understands probably as well as anybody that there are real threats out there to judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers. And she really could have sent him to jail. I've had criminal defendants in cases I've handled sent to jail for far less than putting an image of rifle crosshairs over the shoulder of a judge. I've had defendants remanded for getting caught smoking marijuana, for missing curfew, for minor things like that. So in a sense, Roger Stone should be thanking his lucky stars that he gets to walk out the front door of that courtroom today.
I want to go back to Sarah Murray, who's at the courthouse. Sarah, do we have any indication if Stone does anything like this again, which, let's face it, he could, what the punishment will be, what the repercussion will be?
Yeah, she warned him, Jake, in court, that he could be detained. She pointed out to him that there was not going to be a third chance. If he violated this order, he could be detained. And look, he's not allowed to talk publicly about this case. There are a few exceptions. He can ask for money for his legal defense fund. He can say he's innocent, and that's about it. He can still talk publicly about any other subjects. You know, this is one of the arguments Roger Stone and his attorneys made, that he makes his money being able to speak publicly, and she's still preserving that right for him, but she's giving him a very stern warning, Jake. That's always been one of the concerns about Roger Stone, that if you put a gag order on his case, he could just decide to violate it. And she's saying, look, if you decide to do that, I'm not afraid to put you in jail.
All right, Sarah, thanks so much. David Urban?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Roger Stone has played the caricature of Roger Stone.
Here's Roger Stone. Just to point out, that's Roger Stone walking out of court right now with his team.
So he's played this character for his entire career. And, today I think he kind of went up against the wall of what the line is too far. He's always pushed the line. And I think he went over that line today and found out he got smacked down pretty hard by the judge.
And let's just remember why we're even covering this. Roger Stone is referenced by Mueller during the indictment of Roger Stone. It said, quote, after the July 22nd, 2016 release of stolen DNC emails by Organization One, that's WikiLeaks, A senior Trump campaign official was directed to contact Stone about any additional releases and what other damaging information Organization One, that's WikiLeaks, had regarding the Clinton campaign. Mueller also claims to have direct evidence of Stone's contacts with WikiLeaks, which U.S. officials say has ties to Russian intelligence. So I mean, it's not just a freak show. There is a significance in terms of the Mueller investigation here.
Right. The accusations against Stone are not only that he lied, but that perhaps in these documents they're indicating he could have been central to a conspiracy to invade the United States by means of cyber invasion, which is what the Russians did in the 2016 election. If that's deadly serious stuff, I mean, Roger could go to jail for a very long time. And I think David's right that he somehow seems to not understand the gravity of his situation.
So, I think at the end of the day, I think you're going to find out that, there's no big smoking gun there between Roger Stone and the Russians other than Roger Stone's own hubris and, standing up and taunting the special counsel saying, I haven't been indicted. I haven't been called before the grand jury. I've done nothing. And, you saw him coming out of this courthouse completely differently than he came out of the courthouse after he was arrested, in the Nixonian pose and almost enjoying it, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't look like he was enjoying walking out right there.
Absolutely not. I do want to say to your point about that there's no smoking gun here. Look, I think the fact that Roger Stone has been charged, is in the courtroom repeatedly, shows that there is some there. Look, the special counsel says there are these emails, but her emails, okay, we're back to talking about emails yet again, almost 4 years later, about his emails. And so there is some, I've always said, where there's smoke, there's fire. And this may not be the fire, that some of my very good progressive friends have been looking for, but this is a type of fire. It seems to be that Roger Stone was instrumental in orchestrating the release of the emails from WikiLeaks, or some type.
Or at least trying to find out more.
Dumpster fire started by Roger Stone.
And it's not. And I just want to note, as someone that I was on the campaign trail in 2016. We are going back into a presidential election season. Yeah. That is not normal. You should not have this kind of contact.
Everyone,
with folks.
stick around. We're going to follow some more breaking news as Empire actor Jussie Smollett also just appeared in court, accused of faking a hate crime. The new details were revealed, and the judge's tough words for a different defendant. Next.
The Lead with Jake Tapper. Brought to you by Otesla. Learn more at Otesla.com.
If you have not...
Breaking news, any moment we're expecting to see Empire actor Jussie Smollett leave court after posting bond. Prosecutors just laid out point by point their case against Smollett, revealing extensive details about the planning behind the alleged attack, including prosecutors say he had his attackers buy red hats to resemble Make America Great Again hats. Smollett just wrapped up his first court appearance where the judge set bail at $100,000 and had him surrender his passport. CNN's Nick Watt joins me now live from Chicago. Nick, you were in the courtroom today. There was a lot of drama and a lot of surprising information.
Jake, there were no cameras in there, but reporters were allowed in. It was an extraordinary scene. Smollett walked in wearing a black puffer jacket, looking straight ahead, no expression on his face. His family was in the courtroom. They stood as Jussie entered the courtroom, and they stayed standing throughout the proceedings. As you mentioned, the prosecutor laid out their case that this was not a hate crime, that Jussie Smollett was not attacked by two people shouting MAGA country, but that, in fact, he orchestrated this entire attack. And they took us through it point by point, how it was Smollett's idea, how he first recruited one brother, then the other brother. There were a number of texts and phone calls that they cited to back up their case. They also told us that Smollett took the brothers to the scene, talked them through what was going to happen, that they were supposed to hit him, but not too hard, and they were supposed to let him fight back. He apparently told these brothers that they were to shout at him, "This is MAGA country." And as you mentioned, he'd also given them $100 to buy supplies, including the noose that made that rope, the rope that made the noose, and also the clothing that they were wearing that night. And also, very interesting on the camera, he pointed out the camera to the brothers, and then when he was speaking to police, he told the police, "I think that the attack was caught on that camera." In fact, it wasn't. The camera was pointing the other way. Jake.
Nick, this day kicked off with a pretty intense news conference from the Chicago police superintendent, who did not hold back when it came to criticizing Smollett.
Yeah, listen, Jake, in this job, we get used to what I call kind of law enforcement speak. You know, when they give press conferences, it's usually kind of a just the facts, ma'am approach. That was not this. There were a lot of facts, don't get me wrong, but also Superintendent Eddie Johnston was really speaking from the heart. And he said, you know, this city has taken in Jussie Smollett, and he has slapped everyone in this city across the face. Take a listen.
Chicago police are pissed off. Their words, not mine.
I'm offended by what's happened, and I'm also angry.
Empire actor Jussie Smollett had claimed he was attacked by two men shouting, "This is MAGA country," hurling homophobic and racist epithets, throwing a noose around his neck. Cue an outpouring of love, sympathy, and support on social media, but some doubters and a defensive appearance on Good Morning America.
Who the would make something like this up or add something to it or whatever it may be?
Police say that's exactly what Smollett did. So he went from that tearful TV appearance just last week to today and a courtroom bond hearing. Police say Smollett knew his attackers, hired them, cut them a check, choreographed this entire attack.
And why? This stunt was orchestrated by Smollett because he was dissatisfied with his salary. So he concocted a story about being attacked.
Police say they tracked the two alleged attackers using surveillance footage from around the city, identified the two men, one of whom had appeared on Empire with Smollett, found out they'd flown to Nigeria after the attack on return tickets, arrested them on arrival back in Chicago last week. The law says they can be held for 48 hours for questioning. Eventually, they confessed and were not charged.
So it wasn't until the 47th hour of their 48-hour hold time that we could legally hold them in custody that it took a change. But when we discovered the actual motive, quite frankly, it pissed everybody off.
Here's what police say actually happened. That threatening letter that arrived at the Empire set a week before the attack, Smollett sent it to himself.
When that didn't work, Smollett paid $3,500 to stage this attack and drag Chicago's reputation through the mud in the process.
We have video of the two alleged hired attackers the day before buying the clothes they wore. We also know they bought that rope at a local hardware store. Police believe Smollett planned for the attack to be caught on camera, but the nearby camera was facing the other way.
They punched him a little bit, but as far as we can tell, the scratches and bruising that you saw on his face was most likely self-inflicted.
Smollett now charged with a felony, filing a false police report. Sentencing guidelines on that, up to 3 years in jail.
Absolute justice would be an apology to this city that he smeared, admitting what he did, and then be man enough to offer what he should offer up in terms of all the resources that were put into this. Thank you all.
Smollett's lawyers, for now, criticizing the investigation, the leaks, saying they will mount an aggressive defense.
Now, the judge in this case said it would be entirely inappropriate to release Smollett without bail. He, as we've discussed, he imposed $100,000. Smollett has had to pay $10,000. We expect him to be leaving that jail cell over there, the jailhouse, any second now. Now, the other thing is that judge, who is an African-American, he said that if this is true, it is utterly outrageous. And he spoke specifically about that noose that Smollett allegedly told those men to put over his head. He said that symbol conjures up such an evil in this country. But he stressed, listen, innocent until proven guilty, but if true, utterly outrageous. Jake?
All right, Nick, well, thank you so much. I want to bring in two individuals. Simone Sanders, you're one of them. What's your reaction to the story?
I mean, look, Jake, so one, I have spoken with Jussie Smollett's team. I've heard Jussie tell his account in his own words. And I want to tell you, when I had this conversation about 2 days ago, I believed him. it was staunchly believable. But Jake, when the video came out yesterday of the two gentlemen buying what I refer to as the hate crime starter pack, I, like everyone else, had questions. And so at this point, what my thoughts are that I think we need to see some of the evidence. I think it's very concerning that all of these leaks came from the Chicago Police Department. So frankly, all we have is leaks from the Chicago Police Department, now what they said in this press conference, and what Jussie Smollett and his team have said. And so at the very least, I think we should see the police report. But this is not a good day for Jussie Smollett. And frankly, it's a terrible day for folks who have not come forward, who have experienced hate crimes, and who now are hesitant, maybe hesitant to come forward if something does actually happen to them because of this. So it's just not a good day, Jake, and still a terrible Black History Month.
And then take a listen to what the Chicago superintendent said earlier.
Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations?
And the judge, according to Nick's report earlier, the judge, who's also African-American, expressed a similar sentiment. Obviously, the legacy of lynching in this country is horrific. It's a stain on this nation. What's your reaction?
Look, again, I think Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Cory Booker and Senator Tim Scott, they have co-sponsored the bill to make lynching a federal crime. Lynching was still not a federal crime, and matter of fact, still isn't in 2019. The bill has passed the Senate, but it hasn't passed the House yet. This is very serious stuff. So I stand with the comments that the judge made. I also stand with the comments that the superintendent made. But I'd like, again, Jake, I'd like to note, just things do not add up here. This just doesn't seem right. $3,500 won't even buy a round trip ticket to Nigeria. So I, like many people in America, am confused. Even though I've seen what the police department said, I've heard what Jussie Smollett has had to say, I'm confused. So, which is why I think this has been litigated in the court of public opinion. In the court of public opinion, I think Jussie Smollett is lost. But this still has to go through the actual legal system. And so, I mean, you are innocent until proven guilty, and I think we need to see some of this evidence. The leaks from the Chicago Police Department are very concerning, but a noose, invoking images of lynchings are unacceptable, and it is not a game.
All right, Symone Sanders, thanks so much. We're going to take a quick break. We do have more breaking news from another hearing. The North Carolina Board of Elections is going to hold a new election in one U.S. congressional district after massive election fraud was uncovered. Stay with us.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We have even more breaking news this afternoon. The North Carolina Board of Elections has just unanimously voted in favor of holding a new election in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. That U.S. House seat has been contested for months, since Election Day, amidst allegations of fraud on behalf of the Republican, Mark Harris. Harris today said a new election should be called after the hearing into allegations that one of his consultants tampered with absentee ballots. CNN's Diane Gallagher joins me now live from Raleigh, North Carolina. Diane, there will now be a new election.
Yeah, the board just voted bipartisan vote 5-0 to hold a new election. That means there are going to be new primaries here as well in the North Carolina 9th congressional district. It's a complete 180 what Mark Harris did today, Jake. He came into this essentially going with this GOP line that there was some sort of conspiracy to prevent the Republican who won the race from taking office. But look, it's ended the way it began. It started with this astonishing testimony from a worker who explicitly detailed being paid, collecting ballots, adding in votes, not sealing them, and his own son, an assistant U.S. Attorney General, then testified, produced emails, a paper trail that basically refuted every single claim that his father had made about having no idea about this operative's past in public. Now, we were a bit surprised by Mark Harris's decision today. He was asked as he was leaving whether or not he was going to run again, Jake. He did not answer, but his wife, Beth, said that it was something they would have to think about.
All right, Diane Gallagher, thank you so much. Also in our national lead today, this afternoon, prosecutors presented evidence that a Coast Guard officer planned a domestic terror attack and hoped to kill as many people as possible. And now the accused, who calls himself a white nationalist, is behind bars until his trial. The U.S. Attorney from Maryland said today Christopher Hassan built up a stockpile of weapons and ammunition inside his Silver Spring, Maryland home and created a hit list of prominent Democratic politicians as well as media figures he wanted to target, which includes, regrettably, some CNN anchors. CNN's Jessica Schneider joins me live outside the courthouse where the accused appeared this afternoon. And Jessica, his lawyers tried to argue that what he's accused of is not a crime. How?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So notably, Jake, this criminal complaint, it only charges Lieutenant Hassan with drug and firearms possession. There's actually no violent crime that's alleged here. And that's exactly what his attorney, the assistant federal public defender, tried to argue and stress to the judge. She said, look, Judge, in this detention memo, the government lays out this massive plot that Lieutenant Hassan was plotting this mass murder, but they don't actually charge it. In fact, the defender, the public defender, putting it this way, saying, we are not yet a society that criminalizes people for their thoughts or detains people for their internet searches. So making the point that he shouldn't be detained because he's not charged with any violent crime. The judge in part bought that argument. However, he still ruled that Lieutenant Hassan should be detained pending his trial because he does, in the judge's view, pose a danger to society. The one caveat to that, Jake, if the government here doesn't press any additional charges against Lieutenant Hassan in the next 14 days, any violent crime charges, the defense team can come back and once again argue for his release from detention. Jake?
And Jessica, explain to us who exactly prosecutors say the subject planned to target and why he chose them.
Prosecutors actually say that Lieutenant Hassan maintained this hit list. They say it was on an Excel spreadsheet that was actually stored on his work computer. They say that on the hit list, he was really targeting some prominent politicians, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, among others, some Democratic candidates for president in 2020. They also say on the hit list were some prominent media personalities. And the prosecutors say that Lieutenant Hassan was actually taking his cue from a Norwegian convicted terrorist, Anders Breivik. He published this 1,500-page manifesto, and prosecutors were worried that Lieutenant Hassan was laying the groundwork for a similar type of mass murder here, and that's what they contend. Jake?
All right, Jessica Stenner, thanks so much. The court arraignment highlights the draft of a letter that the suspect wrote to a, quote, known American neo-Nazi leader, and it says, quote, in the letter, the defendant identified himself as a white nationalist for over 30 years and advocated for focused violence in order to establish a white homeland.
That's the definition of terrorism. Terrorism is the intentional targeting of civilians with violence or threats to achieve a political end. Americans tend to think about 9/11 rightly, but this is homegrown terrorism. The Anti-Defamation League said there were 50 political crimes, hate crimes, political terrorism acts last year. Frankly, every one of them committed by the far right. Now, I mentioned earlier it was somebody who hated Republicans who shot and wounded Congressman Scalia from. So it's not. But right now, there's an asymmetrical hatred in this country, and I have to say, our president should be standing up and saying violence is wrong, targeting media figures and politicians is wrong. He has an obligation here to speak out against.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Obligation here to speak out against these kinds of hate crimes.
Do you agree, Antonio?
I mean, sure, I think the president should absolutely do that, but I don't think it's fair to sort of pin this all on the president of the United States. I think political violence is an unfortunate reality in America's very bloody history. We had a lot of political violence in the 1960s going into the 70s. So look, he needs to speak out and firmly speak out. It is unacceptable. We need a free press in this country, and these Democratic politicians, they should not be targeted. This guy deserves to go to jail, and he deserves to have the book thrown at him, and he is a domestic terrorist as far as I'm concerned. And enough of this kind of crap.
Prosecutors say that his Google searches included, quote, what if Trump illegally impeached? Civil war if Trump impeached? Where in D.C. does Congress live? The court documents go on to say that the defendant performed, this is a quote, the defendant performed an internet search for Joe Scarborough after, that's the MSNBC personality, after viewing a headline claiming that Scarborough referred to President Trump as the worst ever. Obviously, this individual is responsible for his own actions. We're not blaming the president or anyone else for his actions, but he clearly has a political view here.
Yeah, but look, he's clearly mentally ill, right? That's the key. Look, lots of Anders Behring, the gentleman who he's kind of fashioning himself after, the mass murder, killed 77 people in Norway.
Yeah.
I mean, that's who he's looking at for guidance here, and his hatred, unfortunately, is channeled in the wrong direction. But the guy's clearly mentally ill. There are lots of mentally ill people. And that, if we want to talk about what the crisis is in America, let's discuss, opioids, mental illness, homelessness. There are lots of crises. We should have full-throated discussions.
I don't want to stigmatize mental illness.
No.
This is evil, not mental. We don't know if he's mentally ill. We know if guilty, he's evil.
I'm guessing he's evil and mentally ill as well. And listen, Paul, I mean, nobody sits down at their house and stockpiles weapons and writes hatred like that if they don't have some sort of some screw loose. But not just that's not normal behavior.
But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the news came just hours after President Trump tweeted, in part, quote, "The press has never been more dishonest than it is today. Stories are written that have absolutely no basis in fact." In response, Rachel Pacella, reporter at the Capital Gazette, where 5 journalists were killed during a horrific mass shooting last June, tweeted, "As one of the 6 survivors of our nation's only newsroom mass shooting, seeing generalized media bashing tweets from the president makes me fear for my life. His words have power and give bad actors justification to act." We saw, I think it was a week or 2 ago at a Trump rally in El Paso, one of his supporters went over to a BBC journalist and attacked him.
Assaulted him. I mean, look, we also saw the president tweet not a couple days ago specifically singling out the New York Times and saying the New York Times is the enemy of the people. And so what this gentleman did, and I'd like to remind folks that the KKK were the original domestic terrorists. And so if anyone out there is not calling this domestic terrorism, I implore you to change your language because
everybody here.
Yeah, everybody here. I'm talking about the folks at home, Jake, because people like to play semantics, and we can't play semantics with domestic terrorism. But when it comes to Donald Trump, I think what Paul is getting at, and I agree with him, and what folks like myself are asking for is that the president has to change his rhetoric. And his words matter, rhetoric coming from his Twitter feed and the White House and the podium and his rallies, they matter. And his rhetoric is not only hot, it is inflammatory, and your words can incite violence.
Right, and I'd say the same thing, right? There needs to be kind of both sides need to put their guns down.
Who else has called? Has anybody called? Don't hold up now, David. I'm just trying to see.
Simone,
has anybody else
You just went on for 3 minutes. Simone, stop. Let me just say
You
say
can both sides me. It ain't both sides. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm simply saying.
We just both sides.
No. The media needs to stop referring to the president as the enemy of the people, and everything the president does is not the end of the world. Every action that he takes is not something incite violence, and everything the president needs to realize, everything the media does isn't. It doesn't make them the enemy.
I just like to note that the media has never referred to the president as the enemy of the people.
Just look at the coverage.
Rhetoric is hot and inflammatory, and if he feels like he's getting off the rhetoric, off the reports, that's on him, not the people.
Is 90%. If you look, I mean, just statistically,
negative coverage isn't calling the president
the
enemy.
Thank you, Jay.
No, but it's incredibly negative coverage, and it spins
welcome
up.
to the White House.
No, I get it. Goes with the territory.
President Obama when he lived at 1600 Pennsylvania.
All right.
Simone, I'm pretty certain that if you look at the coverage and compare the analysis, not close.
Everyone stick around. An American,
not even close.
An American seen in this picture with a Joseph Stalin portrait is now a new target of the Senate's Russia investigation. His links to Russia and to Donald Trump coming up. Stay with us.